Hello everyone. We're going to start something new today. Me and some of the other teachers and teaching assistants at the school, we are going to read you a story. We're going to read one chapter a day. I'm going to start today, and the story that we're going to read is George's Marvellous Medicine by Ronald Dahl. It's one of my favourite books. And today I'm going to be reading chapter 1 to you, and then tomorrow another teacher or a teaching assistant is going to read chapter 2, and then so on. So check in every day, check our YouTube channel every day, and you'll see a new chapter appear. So today I'm going to read chapter 1, which is Grandma. I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning. So be a good boy and don't get into mischief. Now this was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get into. Oh, and don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then she went out, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, Now you heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine. No, Grandma, George said. And just you try to behave yourself for once while she's away. Yes, Grandma, George said. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere. So there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Looking after it all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend your Saturday morning. You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start, Grandma said to George. That'll keep you out of mischief for a few minutes. Yes, Grandma, George said. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small, puckered-up mouth like a dog's bottom. How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma? George asked her. 1 spoonful, and no milk. Most grandmothers are lovely and kind, helpful old ladies, but not this one. She spent all day and every day sitting in a chair by the window, and she was always complaining, grousing, grouching, grumbling, griping about something or other. Never once, even on her best days, had she ever smiled at George and said, Well, how are you this morning, George? Or, why don't you have a nice game of snakes and ladders? Or, how was school today? She didn't seem to care about other people, only herself. She was a miserable old grouch. George went into the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. It's not sweet enough, she said. Put more sugar in. George took the cup back into the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully to Grandma. Where's the saucer? She said. I won't have a cup without a saucer. George fetched her a saucer. And what about a teaspoon, if you please? I've stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it really well. I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much, she said. Fetch me a teaspoon. George quickly fetched her a teaspoon. When George's mother and father were at home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when she had him all on her own that she began treating him badly. You know what's the matter with you, the old woman said, staring at George over the rim of her teacup with those bright, wicked little eyes. You're growing too fast. Boys who grow too fast become stupid and lazy. But I can't help if I'm growing fast, Grandma, George said. Of course you can, she snapped. Growing is a nasty, childish habit. But we have to grow, Grandma. If we didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups. Rubbish, boy, she said. Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not. But you did once, Grandma. Only very little, the old woman answered. I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with all the other nasty childish habits like laziness and disobedience, and greed and sloppiness, and untidiness and stupidity. You haven't given up any of these things, have you? I'm still only a little boy, Grandma. You're 8 years old, she snorted. That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it'll be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? It's ridiculous, she went on. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a good look at Grandma. She certainly was a very tiny person. Her legs were so short she had to have a footstool to put her feet on, and her head only came up halfway of the back of the armchair. Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall, George said. Oh, don't you listen to your daddy, Grandma said. You listen to me. But how do I stop myself growing? George asked. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow the wrong way, she snapped. Makes you grow up instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea, but she never took her eyes off George, who stood before her. Never grow up, she said. Always down. Yes, Grandma. Oh, and stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Ooh, no, I don't like cabbage, George said. It's not what you like or what you don't like, Grandma snapped. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage. And if it's got caterpillars on it, much better. Ugh, said George. Caterpillars give you brains, the old woman said. Mummy washes them down the sink, George said. Mummies are as stupid as you are, Grandma said. Cabbage doesn't taste of anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. And slugs too. Oh, not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. Oh, whenever I see a slug on a piece of lettuce, Grandma said, I gobble it up as quick as I can before it crawls away. Delicious. She squeezed her lips together so tight that her mouth now became a tiny little wrinkled hole. Delicious, she said again. Worms and slugs and beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you. You're joking, aren't you, Grandma? I never joke, she said. Beetles are perhaps the best. They go crunch. Oh, Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, she said, you'll get a beetle inside a stem of stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? Oh, you'll find all sorts of nice things in a raw celery, the old woman went on. Sometimes earwigs. Oh, I don't want to hear about it anymore, cried George. Ooh, a big fat earwig is very tasty, Grandma said, licking her lips. But you got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its back end. If it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwig first, before it bites you. George at this point started to edge towards the door. He wanted to get away from it as far away as possible from this filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She pointed a finger straight towards George's face. You're trying to get away from your grandma. George stood by the door, staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back at him. Could it be, that George wondered, that she was a witch? He'd always thought witches were only in fairy tales. But now, he wasn't so sure. "Come closer to me, little boy," she said, beckoning to him with a horny finger. "Come closer to me, and I'll tell you secrets." George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. "I know a great many secrets," she said, and suddenly smiled. It was an icy thin smile, the kind a snake might make just before it bites you. "Come on over here to Grandma and she'll whisper secrets to you." George took a step backwards, edging closer to the door. "You mustn't be frightened of your old grandma," she said, smiling with that icy smile. George took another step backwards. "Some of us," she said, and all at once she was leaning forward in a chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard before. "Some of us," she said, "have magical powers that can twist the creatures of the earth into wonderful shapes." A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine, and he began to feel a bit frightened. "Some of us," the old woman went on, "have fire in our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry in the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets." George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck to the floor. "We know how to make your nails drop off and your teeth grow out your fingers instead." George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him the most of all. That frosty smile, the brilliant, unblinking eyes. "We know you have to wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you." "Grandma," George cried out, "stop!" "We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other." George made a dive for the door. "It doesn't matter how far you run," he heard her saying. "You won't ever get away." George ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Well, guys, that's the end of chapter 1. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Nasty old lady grandma, and poor old George being left all alone with her. I don't think any of your grannies or nannies are like that. I certainly hope not anyway. Tune in tomorrow, back onto the channel, for Mrs. Strode reading chapter 2. Hope everyone's safe and well. I'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.